Hello, it's Concord Wind. Do I have hot sauce in my mouth? No. I was eating, anyways. You're not interested in that. God says, God is not just the God of his chosen people. You currently follow God, and he is your God. But is he the God of those who do not follow him? Is God the God of all those people who do not follow him? Is God the God of all things? Absolutely. Then are God's work and actions limited in scope merely to those who follow him? No. What is the scope of his work and actions? At the smallest level, the scope of his work and actions encompasses all of mankind and all the things of creation. At the highest level, it encompasses the entire universe, which people cannot see. So we may say that God does his work and performs his actions among all mankind, and this suffices to allow people to come to know God himself in his entirety. If you want to know God, to know him truly, to understand him truly, then do not restrict yourself merely to the 3 stages of God's work, or to stories of the work he performed in the past. If you try to know him in that way, then you are placing limitations on God, confining him. You are seeing God as something very small. How would doing so affect people? You would never be able to know God's wondrousness and supremacy, nor his power and omnipotence and the scope of his authority. Such an understanding would have an impact on your ability to accept the truth that God is the ruler of all things, as well as your knowledge of God's true identity and status. In other words, if your understanding of God is limited in scope, then what you can receive is also limited. This is why you must broaden your scope and expand your horizons. You should seek to understand all of it, the scope of God's work, his management, his rule, and all the things he manages and over which he rules. It is through these things that you should come to understand God's actions. With such an understanding, you will come to feel, without realizing it, that God rules, manages, and provides for all things among them. And you will also truly feel that you are a part and a member of all things. As God provides for all things, you are also accepting God's rule and provision. This is a fact that no one can deny. All things are subject to their own laws under God's rule, and under God's rule, all things have their own rules for survival. Mankind's fate and needs are also bound together with God's rule and provision. That is why, under God's dominion and rule, mankind and all things are interconnected, independent, and interwoven. This is the purpose and value of God's creation of all things. Amen. So, we must understand the reality that God is manipulating the lives of each and every single person on this planet. Every animal on this planet is under God's rule. Every plant, every life form on this planet is under God's rule. The soil, the ocean, the mountains, everything is under God's rule. On this earth and in the broader scope, God is making arrangements throughout the entire universe. When a star goes out, it's because of God. When a star is born, it's because of God. You know, the movements of the galaxies throughout the universe, all the billions of galaxies, it's all under God's rule and management, which shows the scope of his power is pretty extreme. It's really extreme, actually. It's hard to fathom that scope of power. And we must recognize this and recognize God is intimately involved in each of our lives. And although he rules over all things, including the entire universe and all things on planet Earth, even though he rules over everything, he is intimately involved in each of our lives. You know? So, like, the provision that we receive of, you know, food and water and air and the sound. God limited the scope of sound when he created it so that sound isn't so loud that it harms us. He made sure that the food he created provided the necessary nutrients for our bodies and was not poisonous or toxic. He made sure when he created the water that the water wasn't toxic. He's put so much thought and care into the creation of everything for mankind. Because when God created mankind, he created mankind with the most strict, needs, and so he has created everything strictly in accordance with mankind's needs. And his thoughts revolve around mankind. Everything he does is for mankind. He manages the whole universe for mankind. If one thing was out of place, mankind would not be able to survive. God maintains the balance and order in all things. All it would take is if one star, billions of light years away, went out, and it went out outside of God's sovereignty, outside of his control. If it went out and it went out not being under his authority, if it went out without him knowing, mankind would not be able to continue to survive. That's how connected and balanced everything is. And as mankind destroys the planet, God maintains the balance, and he prevents mankind from destroying the earth to the point of mankind's extinction. But he still raises the limits and allows more and more destruction to happen and more people to suffer, so people can see they're on the wrong path. And so people will eventually turn to God. He's very wise. He's like, okay, you want to do things your way? That's fine. Meanwhile, he protects and guides mankind as they do things their own way. But also, while protecting man, he allows man to suffer great harm. That's self-inflicted harm. He allows mankind to suffer that self-inflicted harm as he's protecting man and keeping man from going extinct. Because God cares about man's survival, but God also wants man to be aware that he's on the wrong path. So he does a lot. God does everything for man, really. So anyways, may God's will be done in my life and the lives of everyone else as well on this planet. I just want God's will to be done in the lives of everybody, really. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. God bless and goodbye.